Welcome, Hudson Valley, to this week's edition of In Touch, the award-winning public affairs and issues program that runs across Townsquare Media, the Hudson Valley radio stations. This week's guest is Jeff Feldman from Feldman, Kleidman, Collins, and Sappe LLP. Together, we have a powerful conversation regarding the importance of our first responders in a post-pandemic world and the dark precedent that COVID has left on the fields of healthcare, insurance, law, and more. We invite you to join us and listen to a previously recorded conversation between Jeff and myself here on In Touch. In just a couple of weeks, on September 22nd, In Touch will be officially awarded the 2023 New York State Broadcasters Association Award for Outstanding Public Affairs Program or Series as part of the 57th Annual Excellence in Broadcasting Awards. I'm looking forward to going to the ceremony in Albany and meeting other content creators from all around the state. This recognition would not be possible without the incredible team here at Townsquare, all of our phenomenal guests that we learn from and grow with every single week, and of course you, the listener. Whether you've been listening for a while or you just found us, thank you for taking part in the conversation and staying in touch with what's going on in the Hudson Valley. We here at In Touch are all about, being in touch with what's going on in the Hudson Valley. What better way to stay in touch with what's going on than by downloading the Townsquare Media mobile app for this radio station? Not only can you listen to this station live at any time using the app, but you can also listen to In Touch on demand. Besides In Touch, you can read daily articles about news, events, entertainment, and more that's going on in your community. And when the weather gets bad, you can use the app to check on weather reports and see which schools, organizations, businesses, and more are closed. Your Townsquare Media app is also the best place for concert tickets and events. We are constantly giving away tickets to the hottest shows in the area. Again, you'll have access to all of this if you just download the Townsquare Media mobile app for this radio station. In Touch is nothing without the support from the hundreds of listeners we get on a weekly basis. Thank you so much for listening and taking part in the conversation. If you listen to In Touch through a podcast service such as Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please consider leaving a positive review. With more 5-star reviews on these platforms, the algorithms will work harder to promote our show and bring In Touch to new people. That and also sharing In Touch with your friends and family is so important. Just sharing our links and listening live each Sunday goes such a long way. Thank you for all you do to stay in touch with what's going on in the Hudson Valley. Hello, Hudson Valley. You're listening to another episode of In Touch, Townsquare Media, the Hudson Valley's award-winning public affairs and issues program. We have a very special episode for you guys this week, a little bit celebrating September 11th, of course. I'm really excited about the story that we're going to be talking about here today and just everything that's going on with this group and this individual. We were just talking a moment ago how he has been in this building, done so many talks and all that. He has a long history here, and I'm really excited to be a part of that history with him now. First time getting to interview him. With us today, we have Jeff Feldman from Feldman, Kleidman, Collins, and Sappe LLP, and they are doing so much good work here in the community. You've probably heard plenty of their commercials, or maybe they've worked with you. Jeff, how are you today?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for having me.
I'm really happy to have you in here. And even a moment ago, our director of content, Jonah, came in and was really happy to see you and everything. That just goes to show you like the legacy that you've had here, one in this building and two just around the area. So that says a lot.
We the part of the ethics of the firm is to give back to the community, and this set of stations has been very good to us as far as publicizing some of the different community efforts that we've engaged in over the last 37 years. So we appreciate their help as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm glad that, the history just continues to build and build. So, of course, the way we start off with many of our In Touches is that we ask to give an overview of who we're speaking with. And could you tell us a little bit of the firm, Feldman, Kleidman, Collins, and Sappe LLP, for those out there who are unfamiliar, which honestly, at this point, I don't think there are too many, but for those who might be.
So we're a civil litigation firm, meaning that we only handle civil cases. We don't handle any criminal cases. And all the cases that we handle are the types of cases that would go to trial if they weren't resolved in one way or the other. And the basics of our practice are we represent people who are injured in one form or another, motor vehicle accidents, slip and fall, product failure, things like that. And then the other side of our practice, which we've also been doing for 37 years, is representing physicians, hospitals, large medical groups when they get sued for medical malpractice. So we're on both sides of the fence, both plaintiff and defendant. Helps you to see both sides of the issue and be better at what you do. And we've been doing that for 37 years.
That's impressive. And I was just about to ask, where did the firm begin and what was that like in the early days as you got going and to what it's built into today?
I mean, both Paul Kleidman and I were at another firm here in Poughkeepsie, and in 1986, we left that firm to start our own. And with any new business, it was, tough going in the beginning. You don't have a lot of cases. We had a lot of free time. We were able to exercise a lot. But in relatively short order, we became too busy for that, and we started to grow and expand our practice. So, and here we are today, 37 years later. Unfortunately, Paul passed in 2006. He's not, around to see the growth and to enjoy the, what we've built and what we developed together.
Yeah, but the legacy is there and the name will forever be there. And that's great to be able to kind of honor him in this way and build and grow upon what you guys have started, which is terrific.
Agreed.
And one thing that you were talking about already is how you guys look after the people who are injured or sick or getting them the compensation they deserve. And one thing that we really wanted to highlight, you guys did this amazing job working with this one family. No names will be mentioned, of course, for their sake. But it was an incident where a family member, a volunteer ambulance driver, died from battling COVID-19 while helping others, unfortunately, through the pandemic and everything. And here's somebody who is risking their life. But then what was it? It was his wife wasn't able to get the benefits right away. Could you tell us about what happened with this case and what you guys were able to do to help out this family?
Sure. And you sort of have to put yourself back in the time frame of March and April of 2020.
Absolutely.
When COVID was brand new, all of our businesses were shut down. We were all locked in our homes. We had to clean every product, that you brought into your house. And this gentleman at the end of March of 2020 or thereabouts became ill and ultimately was hospitalized and then passed away as a result of COVID-19. And he passed away early, I would say mid to late April of 2000. And so the Volunteer Ambulance Corps and his wife processed the appropriate applications for the life insurance benefits that would be available to someone who was a squad member and was injured or died in the line of duty. And the life insurance company denied the benefits because there was, from their point of view, there was no way to prove that this individual had contracted COVID from the ambulance squad as opposed to something else. The reality is that their position was not unrealistic, and it was a position that was being taken across the board by life insurance companies and other types of insurance companies, because you wouldn't know whether you had been exposed to COVID in this gentleman's situation as a student, as a substitute teacher, or going into a store to buy groceries, or in any other way. I mean, and back then, we didn't really know that much about how you caught it or how you were exposed to it. We certainly didn't know as much as we do now. So they had consulted, the family and the people who ran the ambulance squad had consulted with another local law firm who was not able to handle this, and they reached out to me, I would say probably in May, mid to late May of 2020, and asked whether or not we could help this family. I spoke to my partners and we agreed to do this at no fee because we thought that if this gentleman had risked his life to help others, that the least we could do was to try and pay it back or pay it forward and do what we could for his widow and for his son. So we accumulated the various medical records involving his various testing, his hospital records, other kinds of things, and we did a substantial amount of investigation to try and figure out how it was that he had contracted COVID. So part of the difficulty in doing that, which sort of emphasizes why the insurance company's position was not untenable, I mean, you have to understand it from their point of view as well, is that, he could have been responding to someone who was involved in a motor vehicle accident that had a fractured ankle. And they could have transported that person to the hospital, but that person could have come down with COVID the next day. He and his crew would not know about it. Or when they transported someone to the hospital with a broken ankle who didn't have COVID, they're in the ER and they're walking around, and there was a lot of other people that had COVID.
Just being surrounded by it.
Right. So you would never be able to identify specifically how he was able to contract this disease. So what was important was that his wife was able to demonstrate that because he knew what he was doing was risky as far as volunteering for the benefit of the community, he never was in the same room or place with either his wife or his son. In other words, he only went to the ambulance squad, he only worked on the squad, and then he came home, segregated himself, showered on his own, ditched his clothes in the garage, so as not to expose either his wife or his son if he was exposed. So what we did was, after we accumulated all of the necessary information and were pretty confident about the fact that this was he was exposed as a member of the ambulance squad, was we reached out to our friend who's a workers' compensation lawyer, Peter Cordovano. Peter has an office in Highland, and Peter handled the workers' compensation aspect of that, and that's a specialized field. And based upon the Workers' Compensation Board fact-finding, as well as the hearings that were conducted, the Workers' Compensation Board heard the testimony of the widow. They had the medical records of the decedent, the ambulance squad member. And the insurance company, the workers' comp insurance company, not the life insurance company, they had the opportunity to cross-examine the widow and to accumulate any records and provide any defenses to demonstrate that he contracted COVID not on the ambulance squad but elsewhere. And ultimately, the Workers' Compensation Board found that he did indeed contract COVID based upon his work with the ambulance squad, and that his wife and son were entitled to the workers' compensation benefits based upon his death in the line of duty. We then were able to take the Workers' Compensation Board finding and have it be applied to the life insurance situation. You might say, well, the life insurance company wasn't a party to the workers' comp situation. Why was that workers' comp finding binding on the life insurance company? And there's an area of law, it's referred to as collateral estoppel. It has to do with issue determination. And since that issue was litigated and the insurance fund for the workers' comp had an opportunity to cross-examine, they were in a similar position as the life insurance company. And since that issue was determined as to them, it would be determinative as to the life insurance company. So once we had that workers' comp finding in the widow's, favor, we were able to provide that to the life insurance company, started our lawsuit, and then they came to the table and agreed to pay the proceeds of the life insurance company. And we were able to give the widow and her son a good-sized check.
Wow, that really is incredible. It's so much in those early days that were so unknown. And here you guys were at the forefront of everything, trying to work that all out and all the necessary steps that were necessary to get there. I feel like in many of these cases, we hear some things on the news sometimes, and we just see the headlines and the bylines of it all, but we don't quite understand all the legwork that goes into it. So I really appreciate you giving it all to us today and breaking that down for us. But also at the same time, how heartbreaking of a story that all is. Here's somebody who is trying to do something for their community and help everybody in a very scary and unprecedented time. And as you said, isolating himself from his wife and his child to be safe, doing all the right things. And unfortunately, that was the outcome.
And look, they're not alone. There are lots of doctors, nurses, first responders, firefighters, police officers, corrections officers who suffered the same fate.
Yeah.
You know, through their work, they contracted COVID and either ended up with long-term COVID or, you know, succumbed to COVID.
Yeah.
And their families would be in similar situations as this specific family. So it happened to a lot of people, and we were very glad to be able to bring this to a conclusion, a successful conclusion for this family.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you touched on that. And I want to kind of ask a little bit more of that in a moment. Again, you're listening to In Touch, Townsquare Media, the Hudson Valley's award-winning public affairs and issues program. We're speaking with Jeff Feldman with Feldman, Kleidman, Collins, and Sappe LLP, talking about this case that they took on from early pandemic about workers' compensation, about a family whose father passed away from helping out in the community. They were denied the workers' compensation, and then Feldman, Kleidman, Collins, and Sappe were able to help get them through that. And there was as you said just a moment ago, how there were so many other families and so many other people, organizations, all affected by this. You said this all started back in March. You were approached in May. This was all 2020. This was the very, very beginning. Shutdowns happened mid-March. Everybody thought that we'd be back to normal in a couple of weeks. Obviously, that didn't happen. In your professional sphere and what you have seen, how has things progressed when it comes to that? This was a very early case, but what have you seen since then with how the pandemic has continued, where things have gone in the health field? How has that impacted the way that workers' compensation has been addressed with the insurance companies, with law companies, with yourself moving forward after this really tough growing pain season of like that early March through May timeframe that you had?
So we were finally able to resolve this with a life insurance company this past spring, like April, May of 2023.
Oh my God.
Because it took a while first to accumulate all of the medical records, to obtain consultations with physicians who specialize in infectious disease to make sure that our theory of what happened with this individual was appropriate and that the timeline fit. And, during, I'd say until early 2023, consulting with someone who was an infectious disease specialist was difficult because they had their hands full dealing with COVID and with everything else that was going on in the healthcare field. So we knew that while we were litigating this, or Peter was litigating this through the workers' compensation system, that there were lots of other similar cases being litigated, not necessarily under workers' comp because the firemen and police officers come under a different system, but it's a similar, analogous system. So we knew that other people in other specialties were going through similar situations, and there was at least one reported case that I remember involving a corrections officer. So obviously each one of those cases would be decided upon the specific facts of that case, and whether or not there was someone like the widow in our case who could attest to the fact that he never went to the food store, never went into any other public buildings, was always on his own. All those cases would be decided based upon the unique set of facts. In our situation, the fact that the decedent, the ambulance worker, isolated himself, that was a huge factual issue.
Absolutely. Given all the time, information that we have now 3 years later, what kind of precedent do you feel a case like this, along with similar cases, are going to impact law firms all around the area and the country, but also in dealing with organizations and insurance?
So, it's an interesting question. I'm not sure, and the reason I'm not sure
fair answer.
Okay, the reason I'm not sure is because there's a movement afoot, and there was an article just within the last couple of days in the Law Journal, which is one of the ways that we keep abreast of current developments, about the fact that this issue of collateral estoppel either may not or will not any longer be held to bind non-parties to the workers' comp findings based upon certain sets of facts. So my understanding is, and I'm not sure whether this was passed or it's about to be passed, but or signed into law, but my understanding of what I read was that if the Workers' Compensation Board finds that someone was an employee, okay, that would be binding on other entities, okay? And in other litigated proceedings. But many other findings that the Workers' Compensation Board makes, which is within its jurisdiction, may not be binding upon parties that are not party to the workers' comp proceeding. So I don't know the answer to your question.
That's very interesting. So that's probably going to make for
more uncertainty.
Yeah, a very uncertain next few years, as a lot of things are going to be, well, things that are currently unresolved as they are trying to be resolved. And then other cases that I'm sure are slightly newer too, as they're trying to figure out, still based on all the after effects of the pandemic. That's very interesting. And that's going to be something we'll have to monitor as time goes on. Kind of hard to say exactly, but one thing that I want to go into now is just the importance of our first responders. They were so keen during that time period. They were pushed to the breaking point during that time period, 2020, 2021 especially. And there was a lot of focus of it on the time. But even now, something that I've realized in speaking with other people, I've had a number of other healthcare organizations on In Touch recently, and a common conversation we've been having is so many people are just trying to move on and forget the pandemic ever happened. And in your line of work, as you said, this took pretty much 3 years to work on with this case. You guys can't forget. We shouldn't forget. And I want to hear from your perspective, working with all these people in the healthcare industry and first responders, where that importance lies for you guys and why we should always continue this conversation.
I mean, and included within what you're describing as first responders would be doctors and nurses,
absolutely,
and police officers, firefighters, medics, paramedics.
100%.
Those people, they either survived it, but they were psychologically scarred, okay? I'll just tell you about one person. There's a lady that I deal with in the medical malpractice work that we do, whose daughter was a nurse at Albany Medical Center. And in the early time frame of COVID, when most of the COVID cases and the really bad cases were in the downstate metropolitan area, Westchester, the 5 boroughs, Long Island and Suffolk. Once the census of people in that area became too great for the hospitals to handle, they were being airlifted to other tertiary care facilities like Albany Med. And what I've always remembered about what this lady told me about her daughter was that she would come home from work, and she was an intensive care nurse, and she was not able to get the smell of the helicopter fuel off from going up to the roof and taking people, from the stretchers out of the helicopters to bring them down to the ICU.
Yeah.
Now, in the context of what you and I have been talking about, you might not think about it in that context, but I think it helps to frame the issue, to think about that one person and that one type of an issue and how that has affected her. And I'm sure that for all the other healthcare workers and all the other first responders, that each of them have similar thoughts or flashbacks.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you gave that example there. That's a very specific example, but I feel that's one that many people can relate to, especially in the medical fields or first responders, because there's always that lasting impression, and especially out of the pandemic, where it's something that's going to be carried, whether it's a scent, whether it's a feeling, whether it's a sight, something that brings them back there that they can't let go of. We talk about soldiers having PTSD.
Right.
First responders, they were the soldiers of the COVID pandemic, and this is the PTSD that they are having to work through. And mind-blowing.
And that's why we shouldn't forget, and we should always be there to help them.
Absolutely. Again, you're listening to In Touch, Townsquare Media, the Hudson Valley's Public Affairs and Issues program. We are speaking with Jeff Feldman from Feldman, Kleidman, Collins, and Sappe, and we're just talking about the importance of don't forget about the pandemic, guys. Don't forget about it. I've had a couple of episodes now where we have talked where it's felt like people are just rushing to move on ahead of our lives, but we are forgetting where we came from and what we still need to overcome. Yes, people are not dying from COVID the way that things were happening 3 years ago, but there is so many effects afterwards that is just eating away at so many of us, and this is why we really need to talk about it. So as we are, celebrating all the people, the first responders of 9/11 this weekend, also think about the first responders who did everything that they could for us in these last few years. And Jeff, as we are wrapping up, I just want to ask you, do you have any final nugget based on this conversation of how we should move forward and how we should look into and care for our first responders and those who have cared for us in such a beautiful way?
I think it's similar to what you said about the vets who come back, from the battlefield. I mean, just saying thank you or letting them know that we appreciate them. The hospitals locally are understaffed. The nurses, nursing ratio to patients is not what it should be. They're stretched to the max, and people look how many shootings there have been in different medical care facilities in the last couple of years where people, for one reason or another, go in and shoot the place up. So I think you just have to thank them for their service and let them know that you appreciate what they did. I'm not sure on an individual basis what more any one of us can do, but collectively, I think we can do a lot more.
That's terrific. And for anybody listening right now who may need your firm's services, what is the best way for somebody to be able to reach out?
Just either call us at 845-897-5199 or find us on the internet at www.fkcs, the initials of the firm, fkcs.law.
Terrific. And of course, all links and information will be in the description of this episode. Jeff, I'm blown away by this episode, and I really appreciate everything that you shared with us today. Thank you so much for your time, your expertise, and your perspective on this all.
Thanks for getting the word out.
Absolutely.
This has been this week's edition of In Touch, the award-winning public affairs and issues program that runs across Townsquare Media, the Hudson Valley radio stations. We want to give a big thank you to Jeff Feldman. For more information on Feldman, Kleidman, Collins, and Sappe LLP, visit fkcs.law. Of course, all links and information can be found in the description of this episode. Whether you've been listening for a while or you've just joined us, thank you. You can find In Touch episodes, new and old, on your favorite streaming services like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more. That and listen on demand with your Townsquare radio station mobile app. Of course, you can still find all articles and audio under the In Touch tab on this radio station's app and website. And don't forget, we're also on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram at InTouch_HV. If you like what we do here on In Touch and want to be on the show, let us know. Whether you have a topic you want discussed or you want to be a guest, the best way to contact us is through our office number, 845-471-1500, or email direct to connor.walsh@townsquaremedia.com. I've been your host, Connor Walsh. Until next time, stay curious, keep an open mind, and as always, I'm glad we get to spend some time